like to welcome everyone to our first ever virtual volunteer appreciation event. We are looking forward to enjoying a lively hour with you, which will be in two parts. First, we'll hear from our deans. Dean Jonathan Levin is here to share some thoughts about ACT and introduce Dean Lloyd B. Minor. Unfortunately, Dean Levin will have to drop off after that as he has had something come up at the last minute. So Susan will then facilitate a conversation with Dean Minor as he shares his thoughts on an ACT project from early in his tenure at Stanford, the role of Stanford's School of Medicine during this pandemic, and highlights of Dean Minor's recently published book on precision health. In the second part of our program, we will recognize the many ways GSB alumni have volunteered with Stanford's alumni consulting team. As we begin tonight's program, I wanted to start by acknowledging that we are coming together in a difficult time for our community and our nation. There is the coronavirus, civil unrest, job loss, food insecurity. Our daily lives have changed dramatically over the course of the past few months, for some much more than others. We are all weathering the same storm, but we are not all in the same boat. As we've seen starkly demonstrated recently, systemic injustices and prejudices ensure many Americans cannot board a weather-safe vessel. With that context, I am humbled to be here today to celebrate our ACT volunteers, who look out for others in different boats by donating their time and expertise to nonprofit organizations across the Bay Area and in Monterey Bay, Pasadena, and Dallas-Fort Worth. We are proud to have you exemplifying the best of the GSB and living out ACT's mission, which is to drive lasting community impact by engaging teams of GSB alumni who apply their expertise and passion to strengthen social benefit organizations. This year, we had over 30 project teams serving nonprofits in their community. We also built out our Experts on Demand program, in which alumni with deep subject matter expertise can volunteer to be on call and provide expert input to ACT project teams. This spring, we pivoted our program from a normally in-person project experience to be completely virtual. It has been a busy year, and we could not have done it without all our dedicated volunteers. Thank you to our project team members, our project leaders, regional leaders, our experts on demand, and our screening team. I'd also like to thank each of my fellow management board members with a special call out to my partner in crime and vice chair, Celine Teo. And finally, I'd like to thank Susan Austin, our fearless director, who is the unifying and driving force behind this program. I think it worth pointing out that while our peer organizations chose to pause their consulting projects with the advent of shelter in place, Susan heroically led the charge in transitioning to an all-virtual project round this spring, ensuring that the Stanford ACT program could continue to deliver value to our clients and community during this especially challenging time. At this time, it is my privilege to invite Dean Jonathan Levin up to the virtual stage. Dean Levin has been a huge supporter of our program, and we are honored to have him joining us tonight. Dean Levin is the Philip H. Knight Professor and Dean of Stanford Graduate School of Business. He was appointed as a 10th Dean of the school in September 2016. Dean Levin joined the Stanford faculty as an assistant professor in 2000. He rose through the ranks to become the Holbrook Working Professor of Price Theory in the Department of Economics. He has taught market design, game theory, microeconomics, and industrial organization at the undergraduate and graduate levels. Welcome, Dean Levin, and thank you for being here.
Thank you, Grace. And welcome to everyone who's able to join us tonight, all the ACT volunteers, and welcome to Dean Minor, who I'm so pleased has offered to be here to share thoughts with us this evening. So we're going to, most of this event is going to be devoted to a discussion with Lloyd about what's going on at Stanford Healthcare and about COVID and how that has played out at Stanford and the agenda broadly for Stanford Healthcare. But both Lloyd and I felt that it would be important to start off tonight by saying a few things about what's going on in our country right now, because it's so all-consuming, and it's really hard to think about anything else at the moment. We had an event this weekend at just behind me in the picture out in Town Square, where about 150 or 200 of our students gathered to show solidarity with the Black community and to stand in silence in honor of George Floyd. And I brought my family to that event, and it was incredibly powerful to feel the sense of unity among the students and members of the GSB community. It was emotional as well. The feeling of grief over the killings of so many Black men and women, including the recent ones that have sparked the protests, but going back so many years, and the feelings of anger and frustration at how long racial inequity has persisted in this country. And our students spoke just beautifully, both Black and white students, a whole range of them spoke just beautifully, expressing those emotions, but also expressing a lot of hope that the fact that we have so many people taking to the streets, and such a diverse coalition of people, and particularly young people taking to the streets right now, might be what is needed to finally, after so many years, make the right type of change in this country. So I wish you all could have been there for that event. It was a very special event to see the GSB community come together like that. We've issued 2 different statements at the GSB. First, acknowledging the George Floyd and Breonna Taylor and other killings, and then last night again, where I personally affirmed my own commitment to do absolutely everything in my power to help affect the change that is needed right now in the country, and affirmed the school's commitment to try to do right by our Black community, and to acknowledge that we can do better than we have done historically at the GSB, and we can do better in a lot of different ways, in representation, in terms of the educational environment, in terms of the staff work environment, in terms of the types of businesses that we engage with, and the impact we try to have in the world. And we can build on some of the successes we have had broadly in diversity over the recent years. And we've committed ourselves to report every year on how we're doing on diversity, equity, inclusion. But the moment calls for a specific and intentional and highly concentrated focus on racial justice and racial equity, and we are going to deliver that. And we're going to need to listen. We're going to need to learn, and we're going to need to learn not just from people at the school, but from our alumni, particularly our Black alumni, but all of our alumni. So we're going to make that a part of our effort to engage with our alumni community, to get help of our alumni community in this effort. I think the school can have a big impact. Perhaps some of you may have seen the New York Times article this weekend about how corporate America has failed Blacks. And I think that's true. I think that article had it right, that corporate America has not provided the necessary opportunity that the Black community needs to achieve the degree of equity that this country ought to have, and equity of opportunity that this country ought to have. So hopefully the business school over the coming years, and particularly in the near term, can be a part of creating that opportunity. And I intend to do everything I can to make that happen. Lloyd, I'd love to turn it over to you to talk a little about the medical school and how things have played out for you at Stanford Healthcare.
Sure. Well, John, thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here with you tonight, you and others. And John, I want to say what a privilege it is to work with you as fellow deans and colleagues at Stanford, and really do enjoy the work we're doing together, and very much appreciate your leadership in so many ways, but in particular of the recovery team that I have the privilege of serving on, and working with you and Lanier Anderson and others on looking at where our university is going to land when we do get through COVID-19. And John, I thought your words were very eloquent and spot on in terms of the place we find our country today. And I remarked just prior to this broadcast, John and I were chatting, and at the meeting of our executive cabinet last Thursday, I talked a little bit about my upbringing and why these issues and the murder of George Floyd and so many others that have preceded, so many killings of Black Americans that have preceded that of George Floyd, why that has particular meaning, significance, and pain for me. And in my story is I grew up in Little Rock, Arkansas. I came from a lower middle class family. And during my first 8 years of schooling, I went to all white schools because although segregation was illegal, that was established by the Supreme Court decision of Brown versus the Board of Education, kids went to school in their neighborhoods, and all the neighborhoods were segregated. So then in 1971, the federal courts ordered busing to achieve desegregation. And so I boarded a bus, went across town to Dunbar Junior High School, which had been an all-Black junior high. And you know how some events, some days in your life really stand out. I know each of us can think of those days. That day really stands out in my mind. It's probably the first day in my life to have such meaning and significance, because I recall walking into the school and seeing that plaster was peeling from the walls, the banisters were missing from the stairways. The library had very few books, and the books that were in the library had been damaged by rats. And this was so different than the schools that I'd gone to for the past 8 years, and so different from what I had been told as a white kid that was separate but equal. It was certainly separate, but as anything but equal. And I think there was a collective enthusiasm at the time among the kids, adolescents, and then through high school, that white kids and Black kids, that we were part of a movement that was going to make America a better place. There was very little animosity. And I have to say, I think that's remarkable, because I think if I had been a Black kid and these white kids came into my school, knowing all full well, the Black kids knowing that they didn't have the resources that the white kids had, I think I'd be resentful, but that wasn't the case at all. And so there was this collective enthusiasm that we were going to be a part of a fundamental change in the social fabric of the country. And there has been progress made. Certainly there's been progress in education, in higher education, in lesser so probably in secondary and elementary education. But the events of the past 2 weeks and so many prior events really underscore that, as John said, we have so far to go. And my experiences as a white person are different than those of Black people. And as I remarked on Thursday, I experience white privilege not because I earned it, but because I was born the way that I am. And to me, that means that I have a heightened responsibility to have impact, and to have impact in areas like diversity and like correcting racial injustices that have been such a part of the fabric of our country. To try to have that impact was one of the drivers that led me many years ago from sort of a very successful and in my zone existence of a scientist and a clinician to looking at other leadership opportunities. And I think this truly is an opportunity. I think it's not only an opportunity, it's a mandate for all of us to have that sort of impact. And I'm really hopeful I do think that the dialogue over the past 2 weeks has been different. I remarked that many of you may know Alan Murray, who is a Stanford alum. He's the editor-in-chief of Fortune Publications, and he does this daily newsletter called Fortune CEO Daily. And one day last week, he had this quote at the bottom of the newsletter, which was, there are decades when nothing happens, and then there are weeks when decades happen. And I do believe that we're moving into those weeks. I hope we don't miss the opportunity. And I think there's so much we can and should do. And certainly as a healthcare leader, health inequities are right at the top of the list. And those have been brought to the fore by COVID-19 in such vivid and palpable ways. And I think that's what that contributed to the very understandable bubbling over of emotion associated with the murder of George Floyd and so many others that have preceded him.
Thank you, Lloyd. And I think Lloyd told that his personal story the other day in Stanford's executive cabinet, and it was very impactful in helping to start a discussion among all of the deans and the provost and the president about how the schools might work together to frame some common university initiatives. And we've been continuing that discussion since Lloyd started off our Thursday morning meeting with his story. And I really look forward to working with you, Lloyd, and all of our fellow deans to see what we might collaborate on in this effort, because it's going to take everyone to step up, not just at Stanford, everywhere, if we're going to make the progress that we all want to see in the coming years. So with that, I want to make sure that we get to our regular event. But I want to encourage, if anyone has questions that want to come back to this topic, I know Lloyd would be happy to talk about it, and it's something that I would welcome the opportunity to talk more with any of you about this topic, or if you have thoughts about what the business school or Stanford generally could do. I think no one has all the answers. So we welcome any suggestions or thoughts, or just good questions that we should be asking ourselves in terms of how we can make a contribution. With that, I want to turn to my job here, which is to introduce Lloyd. And before I do that, I want to do one more thing, which is just to start by saying thank you to everyone who's an ACT volunteer. When I came to the business school a few years ago, I had never heard of ACT, and it was this wonderful surprise to learn that not only were GSB alumni out in the world doing all kinds of great things, but many of them had organized to give back to the Stanford community, to the broader community, to the country, in volunteer efforts to consult and to use the skills that you acquired at the school and in your careers in such an incredibly generous way. And now one of my great pleasures is every so often an email shows up in my inbox, and it's a letter from someone running a community organization or a nonprofit or a social sector organization, or sometimes a fellow Stanford leader, saying, ACT just finished a project for me, and it was unbelievable. We've got a strategic plan. We're going to execute on it. We've figured out how to expand what we're doing. We figured out how to pivot what we're doing, and raves about the work that's gotten done for them. And I just feel great. We're getting to write back and say, right on, GSB. Well done, and I love that. So really want to thank all of you for the work that you've put in and the projects you've done and the impact that you've made. And it really it just shows in a way the success that the school has had over many years in educating leaders with a commitment to society and a commitment to social change and giving back. It makes me very proud the history of the school and for the current state of the school to see that going on. We've benefited from ourselves, the business school, just in the last few years with the wonderful project you did for Stanford Seed. And I know Lloyd will talk about the great work that was done at the School of Medicine when he became dean. So we start with just a really warm thank you to everyone on the call for all the work you've done on ACT. And that brings me to Lloyd. And he's already introduced himself a little bit more than I can, but I'll just say quickly, Lloyd's just been a fabulous leader of Stanford Healthcare. He's an absolute pleasure to work with on the executive cabinet. He'll talk about some of the great things that he's done around precision health, about digital health, about the incredible work that Stanford Healthcare under Lloyd's leadership has done over the last few months to keep the campus safe, to keep the whole community safe, to really lead the way nationally on things like COVID testing. And it's inspiring, actually, to hear about the work that's been done by all the faculty and the physicians and all the healthcare workers. It really makes everyone proud to be at Stanford to see what's going on. I'd just say the last thing I'd say about Lloyd is one of the great pleasures about working with Lloyd is his commitment to collaborating. And I think he has brought something to Stanford Healthcare it's just visible to everyone, which is the engagement that the School of Medicine has made outside of itself. And that actually manifests in a lot of ways. And one way is with the hospitals. And actually, Lloyd didn't talk about the pledge that was issued last week on racial justice. Interestingly, it was co-signed by Lloyd and the CEOs of the two hospitals. Just an absolute show of unity between the hospitals and Stanford Medicine. It just shows how the distance traveled over on that side of campus is really impressive. And then in working with the other schools, and that's just been a joy to get to know Lloyd in that context. So, Lloyd, I'm really thank you for coming here. And we did a longer intro, but I think the topic of the day absolutely called for it. So we stole a little bit of your time to talk about the great things going on at Stanford Healthcare, but I know everyone's going to be incredibly excited to hear about it. So with that, I'm going to step off and take it away. People are lucky to have you. Take care.
Thank you, Don. Thank you very much.
Yes, Dean Levin, thank you so much for being with us this evening. And you also, Dean Miner. And so when you first came to Stanford at the end of December, end of the 2012, you came to ACT and you had a consulting request. Could you tell us about that consulting request and the resulting impact of it?
Yes, thank you very much, Susan. And I, like John, want to thank all of the ACT volunteers that are on this webinar tonight and the many others who devote their time and their expertise to the ACT program. I reached out to ACT. Actually, the origin is that coming in as a new dean, I met with the other deans and I had lunch with Garth Saloner. And I sort of described the dilemma that I was facing coming in as an outsider. I'd given talks at Stanford. I certainly had colleagues on the faculty at Stanford, but I'd never been a Stanford faculty member, nor had I done any part of my training at Stanford. And if you know the governance, if you know the culture of one academic medical center, then you know the governance and the culture of one academic medical center. And there's no perfect model. They're complex organizations with some inherent areas of misalignment. Coming in December 2012, and I knew a little bit about Stanford before coming in, and I knew some of the challenges I would face, but I really found that the alignment among the three entities of Stanford Medicine, that is the School of Medicine, Stanford Healthcare, which is the adult hospital and its associated delivery system, and Stanford Children's Health, Packard Hospital, which is the children's hospital and the children's health delivery system, that the alignment among those three entities was really challenged in many fundamental ways. I found, for example, that the three leaders rarely met and that decisions got made within vertical silos, but oftentimes with little communication among those silos. And it led to a number of inefficiencies and just a general lack of the type of collaboration and coordination that it takes to run a very complex organization like an academic medical center. I was talking to Garth, and he said, well, you know, we have this alumni consulting team. They would love to work on a project helping you think through this. And so why don't you talk to them? And then Susan, I was introduced to you and had the good fortune of working with you and some of your colleagues on a project. I think that the big advantage, and it goes back to me, the roots of the advantage and the opportunities of consultancies, and that is you get perspectives and insight from people who are very experienced, as all the ACT members are, but who are not embedded day to day in the world that they're giving you advice on. That too is very important. And who can interview others and approach the challenges that you've described in an open-minded, neutral way, without being affected by prior interactions with an enterprise or being biased in some way by knowledge or experiences with any one entity or component. And that certainly was the type of feedback that ACT gave me. We've come a long way. John mentioned that we did issue a pledge I think we posted it last Wednesday. If you just go to the Stanford Medicine website, it's prominently displayed. It's also prominently displayed on the homepage of each of our 2 delivery systems. And we the 3 leaders with our communications team, and I'll talk a little bit about how we had 3 of everything before. Now, more commonly, we're coming together to form unity in functions, and communications is one of those areas where, for the adult hospital and school of medicine, the communications team is now completely merged and interacts very, very closely with the children's hospital as well. We came up with a statement, worked on it together, and then agreed upon it and signed it together. It's virtually unheard of for announcements, statements, anything of substance prior to sort of where we've been able to move, in particular over the past 4 years. It was virtually unheard of to come together in that way. And yet a crisis such as COVID-19, or the enormous crisis that is coming about from racial injustice, those crises demand that type of alignment and unity. And fortunately, I think we had achieved that alignment before COVID-19. COVID-19 has further reinforced the alignment, brought us even closer together. But had we not done that groundwork, I think we would have been really challenged to have responded in the way that we have. So what was the key? Well, the key was achieving better communication. And also a key component was, in 2014, John Hennessy, Stanford's president at the time, did articulate a set of principles of Stanford medicine. You can find them online. If you just type in principles of Stanford medicine, they'll come up. They established the framework for achieving alignment, in that they describe, in relative terms, the roles and responsibilities of the leaders of each of the entities. That was important because the overall governance structure here does not, in terms of an organizational chart, ensure that type of alignment. And you can also say that you can have the most pristine, clear governance structure in the world, organizational chart in the world, and if the leaders don't buy into it and aren't being respectful of it, then no chart can really make an organization of any degree of complexity run. And that's certainly true. But here we don't have one person designated as the overall leader. And so having principles of what each of us is responsible for was important and helped. And then from there, frankly, there were changes in leadership. David Entwistle, the president and CEO of Stanford Healthcare, came here from University of Utah about now almost 4 years ago. David came in coming from a background of intense collaboration in his previous leadership roles in academic medicine, and came in firmly embracing the principles of Stanford medicine and the fact that we really needed to work together closely, and we needed to look at how we could come together organizationally. For example, we've merged the IT organizations of the School of Medicine and the adult hospital. The IT organization within the hospital is about 7 times larger than the prior IT organization in School of Medicine, because you have all the medical records and things like that. It therefore made sense for there to be one chief information officer, and for that CIO to report principally to the CEO, David, and have a dotted line and an associate dean position on the school side. We also merged communications, because it tends to come more from the School of Medicine. Although it's merged, it reports in principally on the School of Medicine side, but still with involvement and engagement with David. So we made the commitment to each other that we would look at organizational efficiency and effectiveness, and we would do reporting structure in the way that seemed most logical based upon where the focus and area of principal activity is. We also came together, all 3 entities, to develop and to have a chief strategy officer for all of Stanford Medicine. That person is known to many of you on this meeting and to many of my colleagues at the GSB, Priya Singh, because she had been at the GSB for about 10 years before she came, fortunately for all of us in medicine, came to work with us and me in the School of Medicine in 2013. Worked her way up through the incredible work that she's done to become a senior associate dean for strategy and communications, and then moved into this overall chief strategy officer role for Stanford Medicine. We've therefore been able to, where it makes sense, consolidate functions and roles, but never in a way that feels forced, always done through consensus and seeing that we can be a more effective organization if we achieve this alignment and bring things together in the way that we have in many ways. So that's a little bit of an overview. I think the feedback I got from the ACT team about what organizational structure can do and what it can't do was very impactful. And exploring alternatives to, an org chart that has one person at the top, alternatives that describe roles and ultimately get people in all the roles that buy into the notion that we have to work together much more closely than had been the case in the past. I think that really made us able, as we'll talk about a little bit more perhaps in a moment, to respond to COVID-19 in a remarkably effective way that I don't think we would have been able to do in 2012, 2013, for example.
Terrific, thanks. And what a great segue. Can you tell us a bit about the role of the School of Medicine during COVID-19?
Sure. Our experiences with COVID-19 began on Friday, March 6th. And on that morning, I got a call early in the morning from our chief medical officer saying that we had had a faculty member test positive for the SARS-CoV-2 virus, and that faculty member was being admitted to Stanford Hospital because of respiratory difficulties. Now, the reason we can make that diagnosis accurately and in a timely way in the wee hours of March 6th was that just a few days earlier on March the 2nd, we had been among the first institutions in the United States to receive emergency use authorization for the FDA for our diagnostic test for the virus, the so-called RT-PCR. And the reason we could respond to the FDA's request for expanded EUA authorization, respond literally on the day they issued that request, was we'd begun, we had a faculty member, Dr. Ben Pinsky, an associate professor in pathology, who within days after the sequence of the SARS-CoV-2 virus was published in January of this year, Ben began working on an RT-PCR to identify the virus. He began in his research lab, validated the techniques, moved it to the clinical lab, further validated the scale up of the clinical testing. And then when the FDA made its announcement, as we felt sure they would, because ordinarily to get a new diagnostic test approved requires months, if not years. When the FDA made its announcement of expanded EUA criteria, he was ready with the application. And within a couple of days later, we got approval. We were the first organization outside of the public health departments in the Bay Area to get an FDA approved diagnostic test. And that helped us in our delivery system. And also for much of the month of March, we were doing most of the virus testing for the Bay Area. The major delivery systems, Kaiser, Sutter, UCSF, they were sending their samples, their nasopharyngeal swabs to us to run. We were able to scale up rapidly, but all because we had started to prepare. It's a great testament to what clinician scientists do. I mean, Ben's an MD, PhD. He's a great scientist. He saw he could do it. He knew how to do it. Long before we even knew there was going to be a case in the US, he began preparing, and he was ready with a test to go immediately into large-scale clinical operation in a very timely fashion. That, coupled with going to shelter in place early in the Bay Area, and also the tech firms sending their workers home even before shelter in place, all of those factors contributed, I believe, to us not having the surge in patients in the Bay Area that many other areas of the country have experienced. So testing has been an area where we placed a lot of emphasis here at Stanford. We also, to our good fortune, we just opened a new hospital in November. But our original hospital, which is adjacent to the new hospital, was still structurally intact and ready to go. We brought back on those nursing units that we had decommissioned when we opened the new hospital, the ICU beds that we had decommissioned. We brought all of those back on in early March, preparing for a surge. We stopped doing elective surgeries. At one point in the latter part of March, our hospital was about 40% occupied. Again, we were preparing for what could have been several hundred COVID patients in our delivery system. We stocked up on PPE. We acquired more ventilators. We really prepared for the surge that didn't come. And then when it was clear it didn't come, and when Governor Newsom announced that hospitals in the state of California could resume elective surgeries, we were ready to bring things back online. And within about 2.5 weeks, we were up to 85 to 90% of our pre-COVID-19 elective surgical volume. And today, we're essentially at our pre-COVID levels of elective surgery activity, and much of our outpatient activity has returned as well. In addition to those factors, during and still today, living with and defining the new normal with COVID-19, we've moved a lot of our outpatient visits to the virtual environment, to telemedicine visits. At one point in April, about 73% of our outpatient visits were being done virtually. Now it's roughly in the 50% range or so. Before it was maybe in the 4% range. I don't think it's going back to 4%, but we're really studying, well, what can we do? What should we always have done virtually? And what should we continue to do virtually, even as we move to more normal operations in all of our clinical settings? So this pivoting from literally scaling back and in some areas shutting down the delivery system in preparation for a surge, prepare for the surge, and then bringing the delivery system back online. You know, as I said, the first patient was March 6th. That's 3 months ago. We've done that over the span of 3 months. And that really, it requires pristine and extremely accurate execution. But to achieve that sort of execution, you have to have alignment. And that sort of alignment is what I think we've been able to build from the principals and also from the leaders, concluding that we need, our individual organizations will only be successful as a part of the collective.
Great. What do you hope that students who are going through your program at this point in time will learn that's different than students in the past from this pandemic experience?
I think there are a number of things. I think one of the things is this how to do a telehealth visit. And clearly there's some things that are being sacrificed, and we need to identify those things. But I do believe a lot more of the practice of medicine is going to be virtual, and assembling home care kits that people can use to measure blood pressure and other vital parameters about health. That's a part of making the virtual environment more robust and more accurately simulating what might occur during an in-person visit, and also just planning how we deliver care to incorporate the virtual visit more. That's an educational process for our students. I think the topic we spoke about before, we need to do a lot more in involving our students, teaching our students, engaging our students in in learning about the social determinants of health and learning about the racial determinants of health and how policies and historic injustices in our society have impacted the health of Black Americans and so many others. I mean, that needs to be a part of our curriculum, and we had begun to do many of those things. That certainly is going to be accelerated now, and I think it's absolutely essential and critical that we view that as being every bit as important to medical education as the more classical scientific components of medical education.
So you have recently written a book on precision health, and I'd love you to give us just very broad highlights of that work, but also the role of precision health during a pandemic.
Well, the principle of precision health is that all too often, particularly in the United States, we focused on after the fact healthcare. We focused on the diagnosis of diseases typically late in their course, and then the ultra specialized medical therapies that are required in order to try to catch up from things that we didn't diagnose before or from conditions that we didn't adequately intervene in terms of prevention or in terms of early diagnostics. There are really three themes of precision health, and they are to predict, prevent, and cure precisely, but in that order, with a lot more emphasis on prediction and prevention than we've classically seen in the US healthcare delivery system. And part of that emphasis on prediction and prevention is also a recognition that the social, behavioral, and environmental determinants of health account for roughly 70% of the determinants of health. Depends upon what source you read, but it's in the order of 60 to 70% of the determinants of health are social, behavioral, and environmental. The healthcare, the medical care we receive and our genetics accounts for maybe 30%. And yet, if you look at healthcare expenditures and the focus of our delivery system, including the focus of academic medical centers, it's on that 30% piece of the pie. It's on medical care and it's on our genetics. And I'm not saying we should back away from that, but there's a lot more that we can and should be doing in prediction and prevention, both in early stage diagnostics and also really engaging in the type of preventative strategies and engagement with individuals that really will drive fundamental improvements in health and healthcare outcome. It's a sad fact in America today that the zip code in which a person lives is a more accurate determinant of that person's life expectancy than is their genetic code. And this relates to very much to social, environmental, behavioral, and of course, racial components, racial identity, racial injustice being a part of that as well. I think we have to broaden our lens in academic medicine and in healthcare more broadly to really focus the type of intensity and energy on the social, behavior, environmental determinants that we have focused in the past on the more traditional aspects of health and healthcare delivery. Those aspects being medical care and after the fact diagnosis and treatment. Those aren't going away, and a medical center like Stanford is always going to have an important role in that tertiary and quaternary care, but we need to increase our engagement on the front end with prediction and prevention. And I think these advances in telehealth, as well as diagnostic advances, leveraging the power and the opportunity of digital health as a way each of us can engage with our health in a more informed way, all those are levers that we'll want to focus on moving forward to make precision health a reality.
Mm-hmm. So what does the development of precision health mean for the economics of healthcare?
I think, one thing it clearly means, we still very much in the United States live in a fee-for-service world. And it is the way in which we've structured our reimbursement system in the US. There's some exceptions to that. But by and large, as any economist, and there are many among this group here today, I'm sure, it makes no sense economically in that we're paying for something without any linkage to its outcome. We're paying for increments of care without closing the loop to outcome. And therefore, if you're paying for increments of care, the incentive economically is to do more of those increments. Increasingly, we have to move to a bundle payment environment. We have to link payments to outcomes. We have to reward prevention in ways and incentivize prevention in ways that we haven't in the past. Those are all going to be components of reforming the healthcare delivery system in the United States. And for us as a delivery system, we now live in two worlds. We know we need to, and we are preparing for moving into more value-based care and reimbursement. And yet still our economic model is dependent upon the fee-for-service world. That's sort of the schizophrenic existence that we have in healthcare delivery today. And I think that we will have until we continue to make this transition into more value-based and payments for quality and bundle payments that are really dependent upon achieving an outcome and not just rewarding increments of care.
Great, thank you so much. I'm going to look to some questions from the audience at this point. Can you tell us what the School of Medicine is doing to support local community efforts in response to COVID-19?
Yes, thank you. A number of things. I mentioned before that we scaled up testing early, and in most of March, we were doing the bulk of the RT-PCR diagnostic testing for the SARS-CoV-2 virus in the Bay Area. We still do a lot of testing in the Bay Area. We have 7 locations around the Bay Area where people can sign up. You get an appointment. It's a tent sitting outside, so you get a nasopharyngeal swab without even getting out of your car, and then the results get reported back to you and the physician ordering the test. We currently can do about 2,500 specimens a day. By the end of July, we believe we'll be up to 10,000 specimens per day. And also, we've been looking at the validation of pooling of samples. It's pretty clear that you can pool 4 samples, so a 4-to-1 pooling, and not lose the sensitivity of the test. What does that mean? It means that if we do mass testing, and as we start thinking about bringing undergraduates and other students back onto campus, we may want to do mass testing. A way to do that and really extend your reach is to pool samples. We've shown that 4-to-1 pooling appears to lose no sensitivity. Now, if one of those 4-to-1 poolings tests positive, we either go back and pull the individual specimens, figure out who is positive, or we re-swab, the 4 individuals. But those are all techniques that will enable us to scale up our testing. And we're in communication with a number of organizations around the Bay Area to do that. In addition, we've partnered with UCSF and the Chan Zuckerberg BioHub on a large epidemiological study in the Bay Area to look at the areas of infection and to look at the antibody production to the infection. We know that most people who are infected with this virus do produce antibodies, and those antibodies can be detected in a number of ways. The way we do it here is with a test called an ELISA test. What we're seeing, by the way, is that in the Bay Area, very few of us have immunity. Very few of us have generated an antibody response. Not nearly enough to have the type of herd immunity that would be needed to quell this epidemic in our area and in the country. Specifically for this virus, our epidemiologists believe you need 60 to 80% of the population being immune before you have enough herd immunity to quell the spread of the virus. And what are we in the Bay Area right now? We're probably 1%, if that. So we're a long way away from herd immunity, but being able to monitor immunity and infection around the Bay Area over the coming months, as we're doing with this project that is supported by the Chan Zuckerberg Initiative, that's going to help us in the Bay Area, help our policymakers to make informed decisions about how and when to reopen things. So those are a few of the ways we're working with our communities. We also we're focusing a lot now on outpatient trials of antivirals. I believe there will be a vaccine or vaccines for this virus, and you've read in the press about the encouraging results. I hope that the predictions that it could be as early as January of 2021, I hope those are accurate. That would be completely without precedent, developing a vaccine that quickly. But the pharma companies, the vaccines are going to be developed by big pharma by and large. It just takes hundreds of millions of dollars and a lot of production capacity. We've chosen to focus on looking at how currently available antivirals could be repurposed in the treatment of early stage infection with COVID-19 in the following way. This virus is going to be with us for a while until we achieve that 60 to 80% immunity. And that's going to almost certainly require a vaccine. Until then, if we had an antiviral or a combination of antivirals, that when someone tested positive, they immediately got an antiviral that would reduce the severity of the illness and accelerate their recovery, and maybe even antivirals that could be used as prophylaxis for people who have been exposed. If we could develop and demonstrate what those antivirals were and then deploy them broadly, that will help us combat this pandemic until we get a vaccine or vaccines to achieve the type of immunity we need. So we have a lot of focus on that right now in our outpatient clinical trials. That's another thing that we're doing for the community, because needless to say, anyone who tests positive for the virus is eligible to participate in those trials.
Terrific. Another question from the audience. Increasingly, the COVID hotspots are in the developing world. The Business School Seed Program and Project Redwood's focus their work there. What programs or relationships does the medical school have in Africa and Latin America? And how are these programs affected by or helping in the COVID crisis?
Thank you. Yes, we're pursuing collaborations in Mexico, most notably right now. The person who coordinates our clinical response here to COVID-19, Dr. Bania Maldonado, has done a number of large-scale clinical trials related to viral infections in Mexico. We're hoping that some of these antiviral trials can, in the not too distant, begin in Mexico. To do so requires approval through the Mexican equivalent of the FDA, and also requires the infrastructure to conduct the trials. We're actively engaged in pursuing that. We've also been in contact with a number of foundations that are engaged in activity in countries related to diagnosis and treatment of COVID-19. So there are a number of partnerships and collaborations that we're looking at. And I do very much want us to view our role as also being to extend our reach, beyond the Bay Area to other parts of the world that could benefit from the work we're doing here.
Well, I have just realized what time it is, and because we had such a engaging and important conversation early on, it's kind of cut our time short for this conversation. So I want to thank you so much for your provocative and interesting and educational comments. Really, we're grateful. Also, thank you so much for offering your book complimentary to anyone on this call who would like it. And again, a reminder to folks who are on the call to put your name in the Google form, and you'll receive a copy thanks to Dr. Lloyd Miner. So thanks again. And we're going to move on to our next.
Thank you for your leadership.
Thank you. So if you care to turn off your video at this point, that's great.
Thank you.
And thank you.
Bye.
We'll just be running a few minutes over, but I will want to get to the very important part of this celebration, which is appreciation of our volunteers. So, now more than ever, ACT volunteerism is needed in meeting the needs of the nonprofit community that is struggling with its sustainability. And so there are many ways that alumni can engage in ACT. And we have a video to show you just a few of the ways, and we'll play it for you now.
It's not often that you get the opportunity to do something that's fun and interesting and rewarding, where you can meet and learn from GSB alumni whilst also strengthening your connection with Stanford. and all of that whilst giving something back. So I learned a lot from the staff in the organization that we were working for, and also from the other alumni on my team. And I have to give a shout out here to my project leader and his extraordinary facilitation skills, especially the way he engaged, energized, and synthesized so many different people and perspectives. The highlight for me was the passion, the energy, and commitment that just radiated from the organization we were supporting. It was infectious, and I felt those effects long after the end of each meeting. So why wouldn't I serve as an ACT volunteer? It's an incredible gift, and it's one that I'm really incredibly grateful for.
I've been involved with ACT for the past 3 years, first as a consultant on an engagement, and then more recently as an expert on demand, offering some of the professional knowledge that I have in digital marketing towards some organizations that look for assistance generating interest, awareness, and education among donors as well as their volunteer base. Serving as an expert on demand has been an effective way for me to stay in touch and give back to the community, while also requiring a lot lower time commitment than being a consultant.
My ACT experience began as a way to give back to the community and has grown to be so much more. It provides me with a connection to the community of nonprofits, alumni, and the GSB, inspiring new ideas and forming friendships each year. It's a privilege to be a member of a team with a wide range of talent and business experiences, focused on addressing challenges facing organizations in our community. We all have opportunities to volunteer, but to make a difference using the skills we've developed over decades is rare.
I've been involved with ACT for almost 2 decades, working on 7 projects over that time period. 2 years ago, I was excited to expand my involvement within ACT by becoming one of the project screeners. As a project screener, I find the role very gratifying and rewarding for a couple of reasons. First, I feel that I have broader impact and engagement with the local community because in each 6-month cycle, I interact with several nonprofits and their executive directors in determining what their most important needs are for a project, which then turns to my second reason that by being involved up front in defining the project scope, I'm able to be more strategic in figuring out a way to help the organizations best and also make sure to consider what would be an interesting and rewarding project for the GSB alumni volunteers that raise their hands.
I co-lead Stanford ACT in Dallas. After serving on the management board in Palo Alto, we moved here 7 years ago, and the first challenge was finding a pipeline of projects that would both impact the community and meet the standards that Stanford MBA have for the type of work they want to do. We found that through Communities Foundation of Texas, something that Susan Austin helped set us up with. What's been most rewarding, though, has been reconnecting Stanford alums together, working on meaningful projects, highlighting all their skills. One young alum who just moved back to Dallas said, "This is the perfect way of reintegrating into both Stanford and a new community, working on the right things, making an impact, and polishing the Stanford brand."
It's been my privilege to serve as chair of the ACT Management Board this year. If you're anything like me, you often leave Stanford events with the best intentions of staying in touch, but then life gets in the way. Serving on the ACT Management Board has been a great way for me to go beyond the once-a-year hello and build meaningful connections with other GSB alumni over a shared passion for community service. I love hearing from our clients, for whom access to GSB caliber business talent is a true gift. And I've learned so much from serving alongside this dedicated, talented team and from our director, Susan. I'm so proud of the way we've managed through each project round, especially this last one, and for the ways we've experimented with new ways to reach alumni and clients. And I will treasure the friendships we've built along the way.
So many thanks to Guille Castellanos, who created this film, and to the volunteers who participated in it. I want to appreciate all the volunteers, past and present, who have contributed to ACT in the ways just described. For all the team consultants who are the lifeblood of the organization, we couldn't be ACT without you. To those who've recently engaged as experts on demand, you supplement the efforts of teams and provide skills that are really hard to come by. To project leaders who do the challenging, but most of the time rewarding job of engaging, motivating, and sometimes hurting their fellow volunteer team members, You play such an essential role in developing happy teams and satisfied clients. I'd also want to recognize our project screeners who work with our nonprofit clients to develop, to scope, to screen our projects that come to us. And without your wisdom and guidance and discernment, the ACT teams cannot be as efficient and effective as they are. And to those who help increase the reach of ACT by bringing ACT into their communities outside of the Bay Area, thank you for helping to build ACT's brand as a pro bono consulting group that is just top notch. And lastly, to management board members of ACT, you help me run this program, and we wouldn't be able to accomplish a fraction of what we are without you. So each of us contribute to ACT because we are motivated to create positive change in people's lives in the organizations in the world. But our ACT clients really are able to articulate the benefit that we bring so well that I wanted to read to you 3 quick quotes from recent ACT clients. One said, "The ACT team helped us put a critical piece of work into 5th gear with increased clarity, mission alignment, and revenue potential. We are so grateful for the generosity, wisdom, and insight of the ACT superstars." Another, "As an organization going through major leadership transition, it's not easy to focus on the future impact while dealing with current needs. ACT provided us with the ability to do both. The expertise, commitment, and caring that went into our project was worth more than its weight in gold. We have benefited greatly and established incredible relationships along the way." That was Leader Spring Executive Director, and the former quote was from Delivering Innovation in Supportive Housing Executive Director. This final quote comes from an ACT client who's also a GSB alumnus. He said, "The ACT team did a really great job for us. Honestly, we have had a lot of experience with pro bono consultants from top flight firms over the years with massive projects, and this was crisper and more valuable and has really helped us to see clearly into this field and know what we need to do next. A lot of hard to impress people were impressed. So many thanks. We are really grateful to ACT." And that's from Common Sense Media CTO. So thank you, alumni, whether you are current, past, or not yet ACT volunteers, for passionately using your skills to serve the nonprofit space. And if you're an alumna or alumnus who's looking for a new ACT opportunity, I encourage you to consider the 2 management board open positions that we have available and are recruiting for at this time. In the chat feature, there is a link to a document that explains the roles that we're looking to have met, and I would encourage you to consider that and apply by June 17th if you're interested. In closing, as the GSB, Stanford, and our society pivots, whether in response to COVID-19 or racial injustice or other less life-altering reasons, ACT also will pivot. But there's one thing that will not change. You can count on ACT to provide engaging, meaningful, impactful opportunities to serve the social sector and with organizations that change lives, change organizations, and change the world. So thank you so much for joining us. Have a great rest of your evening. Good night.